Well, good morning, everybody. Here's the plan for today. After we cover some of the near-term severe weather threat and talk about the temperature pattern across the lower 48 and much of the Canadian prairie, we're going to dig into some longer-range content only for South America today, and that'll be at the very end of this. But we've got a lot to do before we get there, and some of that's going to come from this analysis from yesterday's satellite data. A low spun up here that was kind of born off of the East Coast that rolled all the way into parts of the Northeast yesterday, while we saw quite a bit of thunderstorm activity again in parts of the Southeast. As the sun was setting, some very large storms erupted here in the northern plains, one of the areas we were keeping an eye on. You can see a lot of the wildfire smoke that is around that. There are also some storms right around sunset I'm going to show you here in the Midwest I think are important to take a quick look at. And this is going to be a corridor later today. I'm going to be quite concerned about the risk of those strong to severe storms yet again. But yesterday there was a series of large fires that erupted, and while cloud cover hit parts of the Northwest, this was some of the showers and storms that were coming in here that we were kind of talking about. I want to show you a bit kind of closer view of the Pacific Northwest, which will include part of the Rocky Mountains and even some of the plains here. And we're going to zoom into that view. There it is this morning, and I'm going to show you yesterday, because there was a large fire right here that was near like Loveland, Colorado, that erupted and blew its smoke all the way into parts of southwestern Nebraska. Excuse me. And you can also see the wildfire smoke that's from the huge fires here in Northern California. A lot of what's going on in Oregon and Washington is now masked by clouds, but the smoke through the Snake River Valley is still quite evident as well. At the tail end of this animation, though, very deep storms erupted here in parts of the Dakotas. And the one to the south, this one right here on the Nebraska-South Dakota border, it was a hailer, putting down some very large hail. I'll show you that in a few moments. But this morning, this storm is kind of important. And the reason it's important is because there was not a single model this morning that was initialized with it. And this is kind of important to assess because this tells me a bit about how capable the atmosphere is in this area to toss up convection. It'll also be important later today how this will modify the morning environment in this region, which could be important for storms later on this afternoon. But yesterday evening, storms here. Look at these deep storms over in parts of Indiana. Storms popped up just south of Springfield, Illinois. I was actually born just outside of Springfield, Illinois. And these storms are actually tornado warned for a while. In the overnight hours, as you can see, the infrared blew up into a broader line of storms that eventually rolled through this part of southern Illinois, southern Indiana, over in Ohio. And they did some damage last night. I'll share those reports in a few seconds. But just kind of putting it all together, looking at the last half day or so of radar data, and we can kind of get a good glimpse of where these storms kind of rolled over the ridge in the west, the rain that came in with the trough that cooled things down in the northwest. You can see the storms in the Ohio River Valley, much needed rain getting into this area. And I think this is just kind of an important view of how we're getting into this transition time period into the month of August. On the severe weather side of it, though, let's go back to yesterday's reports. There they are. We had in total about 230 reports of severe weather, and again, some very large hail out of the storms that were coming out of South Dakota, including some very strong winds. This is what northwest flow does. And again, this is just flowing right in. So the upper level flow coming over the ridge, flowing right in to where the Gulf moisture is coming around the Bermuda High. So looking at some of the hail reports from yesterday, just take a look at these storms streaking through here, some of which were producing baseball-sized hail and doing quite a bit of damage across some key acres here in this section of our western Corn Belt. That's not to ignore some of the hail signatures we saw on radar that moved through Iowa into Illinois as well, or those in Kansas. But this was a lot of hail damage right into this area. Again, very productive ground in the western Corn Belt. Okay, total precipitation through the last 72 hours. This is how things look. And if we add to this the 4 days leading up to it, you get a 7-day map that looks something like this. And now that 7-day map, I'm sure I jumped right down here. This was all of that strong flow around the Bermuda High we talked so much about, just soaking the Texas coast into the lower Mississippi River Valley and so much of the southeast. I'll be looking forward to the new drought update, which will be coming out on Thursday morning to see how much of this drought has been kind of pushed back by some of the decent rains that have gotten to the southeast as of late. I imagine it's going to stay pretty firmly anchored in parts of Ohio and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. This is an area that's gotten over quite dry. We've had a lot of discussion about the heat and dryness that's into the Central Plains this week, where flash drought scenario will be continuing to build. And just looking this morning at 6:30 a.m., I'm just kind of trying to see how cool it got last night. And so much of the central U.S. is just loaded with loaded with moisture in the atmosphere. And the high humidity values, just one part of the reason why we couldn't get these temperatures to drop off much last night, staying like in St. Louis over to Kansas City, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Later today, this is our setup. So you've got your surface level winds, but what I'm showing you over the top of it is CAPE. Now, CAPE stands for Convective Available Potential Energy. You probably watch other meteorologists that talk about it a lot. It's a fantastic metric because what it includes, kind of in the calculation of it, is both the instability in the atmosphere, in other words, how quickly it gets colder aloft, and how much moisture is in the lower atmosphere, which is going to be the ultimate supplier of the heat to the storm, which is going to make it buoyant in the atmosphere. And you can see where it's all coming from. The moisture is all coming from the Bermuda High through the Gulf and rolling right through the Mississippi Valley. But later today, this is the corridor. Let's kind of zoom in on this a bit. That is the corridor over which the CAPE values are going to be quite high, meaning the atmosphere is destabilized. And what we'll have in this area is storms from this morning even, but yesterday as well. We're going to have their outflow, plus a very weak boundary in this area that's going to initiate thunderstorms later. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center, in fact, let's get an update. Okay, they haven't changed it much this morning, but keep an eye on these throughout the day today, because I imagine they're going to modify this as we go through the morning hours. But they've got the risk in the Dakotas, and they've got it really stretching from Nebraska and Iowa, clipping parts of South Dakota, but rolling all the way through the Mid-South here down into Tennessee. And that's going to be the trajectory over which we're going to keep a close eye on storms later today. I think the primary threat's going to be wind damage, but some of these storms could produce some hail as well, as like we just saw yesterday. This is tomorrow on the 31st. We're going to go back to the western Corn Belt again, from Kansas up to Minnesota and South Dakota and everything kind of in between. I'll be heading out to Omaha this evening, so that'll be an interesting flight out there. I'm going to give a talk tomorrow morning in Peoria, fly out of Chicago and head over to Omaha for a great event with Farm Credit America. So we'll have to see if I kind of land in some interesting storms there and get a little chasing before I get back to work. And then this is what we're expecting on day 3, the 1st of August, which is, again, the risk coming out of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio toward the Ohio River Valley. All right, so let's get into some model runs. Again, remember, I mentioned that it's about 7 o'clock this morning as I'm recording, and there is a storm right here that was severe warned. And it was not in the NAM, it wasn't in the HER, it's not been initialized. And so we have to remember that. That means that part of the both the kinematic, the dynamic, the radiative, the convective, all of that stuff that a storm does to modify the environment was not included. And in fact, my phone just buzzed. I'm looking at it over here. My cousin who lives over in Western Illinois just sent me a picture. Oh, gosh, I'm going to have to, let's see if this looks good. Yeah, I'm just going to pull this up. I hope you don't mind. Go to my text messages. Oh, why didn't it show up here? Shoot. Well, my cousin Matt, he is watching this storm right here. He works in Springfield. He lives over in Jacksonville. And he sent me a beautiful picture of a squalling. Darn it, Matt, I wish you had an iPhone. I could just pull this up quickly on my computer. Anyways, there it is. This is the storm that was not initialized. And it's rolling through there and probably producing some straight line wind damage. And we can see here that there is a special weather statement out for hail up to ½ inch and wind speeds of around 50 miles an hour for the storm coming through. And he said, I'm sure it's fine. It's a beautiful picture of a shelf cloud that he has sent me. Darn it, I wish I could show it to you. Anyway, we'll put it in tomorrow's report or something. All right, let's get back to this. Go back up here. There we go. That's not there. Do you see that? It's not in the HER either. So as we play this forward and you start to see more complex as the storm's rolling through here, understand that the storm that went through this morning is modifying this environment. And it'll be interesting to see how the storms this afternoon, this evening, play against this. Now, that's just one area, stormy in the northeast. It's big storms, as we talked about, still coming out of Montana. They're going to be isolated, but they're there, and they're also in the northern plains too. So this is then the overnight hours and tomorrow, and you can kind of see where the storm pattern continues to roll through. I'm going to show it to you all again, but let's just play it quickly, starting this morning at 6 a.m. and just rolling through the next 60 hours. And as we just play that out, there's also an event going on in parts of the Carolinas. Take a look at the storms down here tomorrow afternoon on Wednesday. Locally, some heavy rain hitting some key acres in the Carolinas, which need this rain. And that's just our near term. That's what's going on right now. Now I'm going to take you to the upper levels as a way to also introduce what's going on in the tropics, which normally we don't do, but we're getting a reflection of these two potential systems showing up in the artificial intelligence, upper level height pattern. This is the trough that's kicking off the storms that's kind of rolling over the top of this ridge we're going to watch middle and end of this week. And the ridge is squashed to the south, which is where all the heat is, but the trough that's rolling over its northern edge, this is classic northwest flow. So whenever you hear us meteorologists talking about that, it's about a ridge somewhere over the south and weak little shortwaves that just kind of roll over the top of it, creating the trigger to get storms to pop. And so as we work our way out to August 1st and beyond, we're going to just pay attention to where that ridge goes. And you can see that once we start August, it will likely anchor itself back over the four corner states while this deeper trough develops. And that's going to really influence our day 5 to day 10 temperature pattern, which I'm going to show you in a few moments. Also, by Sunday, we've got the artificial intelligence showing us that tropical system we've been talking about for a while, kind of going in this direction. So from Sunday into Monday and Tuesday, it seems as though the broader trough here, plus the position of the ridge here, is kind of deflecting and keeping this out. And it seems like the Bermuda High may be having a more eastward focus to its center. And that's going to also help pull this right into this saddle point in between and send it on up the East Coast, but off of the East Coast, at least based on current observations here in the models. Not observations, but current model projections. Forgive me there. But this is the 6th and 7th. There's going to be a really sharp contrast in temperature in here getting into week 2. That's where I expect it to be wet. But if you're to the south of it, very warm. To the north of it, quite cool. And going beyond this, as we possibly watch this thing intensify quite rapidly off the coast, the artificial intelligence is putting out another tropical system. It is way out there in the forecast. This is August 12th, but there's something it's got right in through here. We've made a case that the Gulf of Mexico is primed for developing tropical systems, and certainly some of the models are starting to pop those out. But by August 12th, the depth of this trough, bringing in flow like this is going to create a wet corridor here in late summer in this region in week 2. And it's also going to drop things off in terms of temperatures in the west, possibly, but keep things open for storms here too. So I'll show you those temperature and precipitation pattern in a few moments. Just understand, August is already an extremely hot month for the west anyway. So we'll just see what this does in terms of making some storms out here. All right, to the tropics. Let's get an update on this. Okay, that's their 7:44 a.m. update. 60% chances where they now have the potential, development here as we really take this African easterly wave and put it over the kind of the northern edge of the Lesser Antilles. Seems as though best model guidance takes this over the Bahamas. And if we look here at the at the European model probability of developing a tropical depression, it seems like the best evidence is to keep that right in that saddle point I mentioned a few moments ago. Now, some of you are probably looking at this and going, holy cow, what is going on? Yes, there's another tropical system developing in the East Pacific, but it's going out to open ocean. And you're going, what is happening in parts of the Great Lakes states? Well, this is just an algorithm applied to the European ensemble, looking for the probability of tropical depression. So what's a tropical depression? It's where you have a low that has a sustained wind speed of 25 knots. So there's going to be another low that's here that meets that criteria, likely going over the Great Lakes states. And you saw it. It's the southern edge of that broader trough in this area. So that's what's going on here. All right, let's look at this from another way. Now, the GFS this morning, this is the 6Z run. It was also in the, this is the 0Z run. Is that the 0Z run? Let's go back to it. Here we go. Yeah, this is the 0Z run. What was very interesting was that the GFS by Thursday into Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now, if you remember, on Sunday in the European model, the tropical event was leaving here and heading in this direction. There's our Bermuda High. The GFS pushes it there. Now, this is the operational run. That's all this is. This is not an ensemble. It's the operational run. And shoves it right into Louisiana and eventually into Texas. And that is an outlier, according to all of the other forecasts. But we might as well look at it just for the heck of it, because it eventually takes what's left of this 10 days from now and shoves it into the southern plains. And there's a lot of people right here that would love to get the remnants of a hurricane, just to get the moisture. Now, is it in other models? Let's go back. Leave it right there at 174 hours. I'm going to flip this over from the GFS to the European. And the European has it here. So much different scenario and where this potential low is going to go. We just need to understand that and know that the Bermuda High will ultimately dictate all of this, I think. But what a spread. The European taking whatever this is here, the GFS floating it off in this direction. And by the way, I'll go back to the GFS just for a moment. And let's use, so this flipped over to the 6Z run. The 6Z run, is putting it there as well. And just for the fun of it, did the 18Z do that yesterday? It kind of did. It's got something there. How many runs has it done this? 12Z? Holy cow. So the GFS really wants something in this area. And we're just going to have to watch it. I often trust the European model. I have several reasons for why. It's about statistics, but we cannot ignore this. And I just want to keep an eye on it. But I need you all to remember this is not about hype. This is just about model data. And we're out here pretty far in the forecast. And so much can change over 11 days. But it's important for us to see, to see what the model is doing. Okay. If we come back to the temperature side of this, today we've got excessive heat that's throughout much of Kansas into parts of Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, all through the Delta here, and then surrounding it with excessive heat advisory. Early this morning, we had these areas under severe thunderstorm watch. I showed you the storms going through like Sangamon County a few moments ago. Behind this, this is all air quality issues plus some excessive heat. And we're really just keeping an eye on the wildfire smoke in the west. And if you take a look at the 48-hour forecast of it, again, not a lot of surprise here in what you're seeing. Those winds that are kind of coming out of the west are continuing to push these fires and making the situation very difficult to fight. From there, let's go take a look at our precip forecasts. So the artificial intelligence through the next 7 days is shown here. This is the national blend of models. It's that same story we've had. Open, stormy corridor, Bermuda High influence, tropical system eventually getting here. But if you're into this region, very hot, very dry. Temperatures again today, 105, 108 degrees over parts of Kansas, and very limited chances for storms. Storms will pop on that heat, but it's going to be hyper-local in their delivery of precipitation. There's the WPC 7-day outlook, and here is the European model. 7-day. Let's do this. Let's step this up to the 10-day European. And that is where it's putting this tropical system. And if we go to the GFS, let's step this one up to the 10-day. And look at that. That's such a different solution than the European. And maybe it just has something to do with how this eventually gets caught in that saddle point between the trough, the Bermuda High, the ridge that's here. My guess is, I have not looked at this closely, and I will, but my guess is the placement of the ridge is likely grabbing this tropical system and pulling it along its southern edge in the GFS. That would be what I think is going on here. But we can actually take this out farther. The GFS runs out 16 days. And the 6Z is trying to drag that moisture all the way here into New Mexico. That's amazing. We'll have to just watch this carefully. But the GFS clearly wanting to anchor a ridge right in this area. And that's probably going to influence like the CPC's temperature forecast as well, which we'll get to in a second. But to compare the models only out 1 week, I want you to see this. The GFS is much wetter here through the Great Lakes. The European is wetter in a corridor that comes out of South Dakota and goes all the way to Tennessee and Kentucky. And you can already start to see the split 1 week out, where the GFS is wetter here and the European is wetter there on the eventual track of this tropical system. Still a lot to be deciphered here. I want to show you some probability maps too. This is the chance of getting an inch over the next 10 days from the European. And this is the chance of getting an inch from the, sorry, I got distracted again. My brother-in-law now sent, I got to show you these because he does have an iPhone. I think they should be coming in, Brad. So this is my brother-in-law. He lives over in Rochester. Beautiful shelf cloud. Man, I'm jealous. So my family over in Springfield and the Rochester area, I was born in Rochester, given some just beautiful pictures of these shelf clouds rolling through. And man, they're getting some great storm action this morning. But this is the one that's warned. Let's take another look at it here. All right, latest update. In fact, let's just play this. Yeah, the shelf cloud that they're seeing, I'll stop this for you, on radar is this line right here. So the picture you saw is just outside of here in Rochester. I imagine farther to the south. It's a much more photogenic shelf cloud, but that's pretty amazing, Brad. Thank you for sending me that. Amazing stuff. Okay, back to it. There we go. Probabilities. Is that where it was? Yes. Probabilities on precip. Just take note of the differences between the European here and the GFS. These are 10-day forecasts. I see a shift more north on the precip here in the GFS. And on the dry side of this, though, both models are pretty clearly anchoring that dryness into this area, except if we can get a tropical system to come in here. So it's not showing up fully in the ensemble, but some of the operational runs dumping that moisture into Texas from this tropical system. Okay, what about day 10? So last week we kind of made a case that the atmosphere was going to lose a lot of its momentum, and that forecast fizzled by the end of the week. And we now see that by this point in August, there's a broader trough of low pressure here, and the winds have now picked up in their momentum in this area. And why that's so important is every one of the week 2 forecasts have now gone wetter to the south of that. GFS, European, the CPC. In fact, if we just zoom in on the European, this is that corridor that now stays quite wet going out there into mid-August, with storms rolling around the base of that broader trough. That's the latest forecast, and it's been consistent with that over the last few days. It'll be this area to the south of it that the ridge is going to stay, and I think that's part of the reason why the CPC has now started to keep this idea of like the 6th, 7th, and 8th of having a stretch of hot days rolling through this area with temperatures creeping up here over 100 in the Central Plains and deep into the 90s in parts of the Mid-South. Let's see how we get there by going to today's high temperature forecast, which again, very hot in the Central Plains of the United States, cool in the Northwest. But by Wednesday into Thursday, heat comes back on in the Northwest. It spreads through a bigger section of the country, and we're watching the storms in this area, keeping things a bit cooler. But very hot as we get into the beginning of August, except this one spot in the Midwest, right there, and down in Texas, where we have some cloud cover and storms. Take a look at the Northwest by Friday into Saturday. The northern plains picking up triple-digit heat, stretching all the way back into Washington, Oregon, and Idaho through Montana. That's Saturday. Getting into Sunday and Monday, this is about the time where the broader low begins to develop, and we're going to see the temperature pattern change north of that line. You can see it in the day 5 through 10, and then the day 10 through 15. And it's also in the European model. That's day 5 through 10 and day 10 through 15. And it'll be the southern side of this where August is going to be pretty stormy, I think. We're going to continue to see storms rolling through that area. Okay, bigger picture thing. I'm going to keep showing you this until it doesn't work. But the artificial intelligence 15-day, so this is the next 2 weeks plus a day, looking at the upper level height pattern, is anchoring a trough here and a trough there and putting a large ridge in the west. For Europe, deeper trough here. This is what's likely going to keep things interesting for the Paris Games on the southern side of this. And the broader trough here over western Russia is critical too. In the southern hemisphere, the jet stream is cranked on this side of this trough, which is influencing a lot of South America and a lot of Australia. And I want to switch to a discussion about South America to wrap this video up here. What we're going to do is look at ocean temperatures first. Now, there's a couple of dominant preseason things I want to talk about. They're on both sides of South America. One is La Nina, and the other is the Atlantic meridional mode. In season, once we get into the growing season, we're going to talk more about the MJO because that's a much more active feature when we get into our fall, their spring. So what's going on with these two features? La Nina, it continues to try to develop. The ocean temperatures here continue to cool, but it's about the trade winds, and we're seeing stronger trade winds, which means by fall, I think we will have a La Nina signal. How strong it gets after that is still up to be decided, but it's coming in, and it's going to start to influence the pattern. So what I'll be watching for is this: humidity, low-level humidity. In July to September, if we're going to be thinking, now this is only about South America, but from July to September, we want to watch this area here. We want to see if we can get humidity levels higher than normal, in other words, these colors, anchoring into this area, because if it does, this will be the region that once the Brazilian monsoon sets up, where it draws its moisture in, just like that. So the humidity profile in this area, if it is high, these colors, in August, September, and October, will have an early onset of the monsoon if the flow can get going. So then it becomes a question about the trade winds. Now this is a zonal wind graphic. What we're going to be looking for here is blues. If we have blue colors in this area, that indicates a stronger easterly wind driving the flow out of the tropics, where the moisture is, into Brazil. Now, if we end up getting a monsoonal circulation that starts out of the subtropics, then the monsoon will be very, very late, because this is very dry air down here inside of the subtropical high in the South Atlantic. Now, we're looking at winds here, but I'm just telling you, it's all about wind direction. That's most important. So thinking all of that through, we're not there yet. We are still anchored in the dry season. So that's a 10-day forecast, and there's nothing forecast in this area. But it's quite wet in southern Brazil at this point. It's even rainy in parts of Argentina. Now, if we stretch this out to a 6-week view, this gets us all the way out to September the 13th. And why this is critical is I think there have been several regions throughout Brazil that have been given the green light to plant a crop starting on September 1st if monsoonal rains arrive. And what's interesting about this is we're starting to see a region in through here showing up with near normal precip, and that includes Mato Grosso and Pará and Tocantins, Goiás. A little drier in parts of south central Brazil, but very wet in southern Brazil getting into Paraguay. So that is the current forecast from the ECMWF. Now, given that this is all very much pre-season, and I just kind of gave you a couple of hints as to what we watch, I want to show you a couple of additional slides. There's been a long-standing trend for the month of October, which is a key month to get rains. That's been in published research, and it's also just been in data analysis that I've done using the ERA 5 data that shows that there's been a drop of about 80 millimeters of rainfall in October. So 80 millimeters is about 3 inches. That, in other words, now we're about 80 millimeters drier than we were in the 60s and 70s, and this trend has been pretty robust. And this is last year, which was extremely dry in their spring. Now, last year, what happened is no monsoonal flow early, and it pulled from the subtropics rather than the tropics. Well, from here, let's show you what we've got for September, October, November. This would be like the spring planting window. If we look at the correlation between La Nina and the Atlantic meridional mode, the two big preseason factors I'm going to look at, this is what you end up getting. So the correlations are wetter here for La Nina in the Amazon, drier into southern Brazil. But if you look at the Atlantic meridional mode, knowing that we're waiting on La Nina's influence to show up, the Atlantic meridional mode has a couple of drier pockets in these two areas when it is positive. And it seems as though some of the models are responding more to the Atlantic meridional mode being so high right now than they are La Nina, because the newest IRI multi-model forecast suggests the probabilities are higher for being drier in these regions. So this would be a slower start to the monsoon. Now, that does not mean drought. It just doesn't at this point. It just means the potential's there for being drier, and that's something we're going to have to watch. From there, let's look at the European model. So same two maps on the left, but the European model looks very similar to this, doesn't it? So look at these two regions of drier. They're here, and here, and near normal in the middle. And we can even see that the European's trying to put some wetter conditions right there in the middle. So we'll watch that pretty carefully as well. But getting into the main part of their growing season where the soybeans need the moisture, the models at this point I think are responding more to the typical summer La Nina pattern for South America, which is wetter to the north and drier to the south in Argentina. And the European model's quite aggressive with that pattern. The IRI is not. It's got good moisture through like an 80+% of Brazil's growing area here, but drier on the north and a little bit drier along the Paraná River down to the south, which means the IRI and the European do not fully agree on where this is going to be. But at the same time, this model has a much more aggressive La Nina look to it than this one does. So we'll leave it at that, and just want to let you know some of the things I'm watching. But sorry for the distractions with the storms this morning, but those are some neat pictures that were sent to me. So take care. We'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.